What if I told you that the very foundation of your modern rights, the freedom to speak your mind, to get a fair trial, to choose your leaders, was built on a wave of blood, terror, and utter chaos? It's a bizarre, bloody paradox, isn't it? The French Revolution wasn't just a story about guillotines and Marie Antoinette saying something about cake. It was a brutal, messy explosion that completely destroyed a 1,000-year-old system. And yet, from its ashes, it forged the very ideas of citizenship and human rights we take for granted. So how did one of the most violent periods in history give birth to our most cherished liberties? How did a nation literally tear itself apart only to reassemble into a model that would inspire democratic movements for centuries? To get it, we have to go back to a time when the world was fundamentally different, to a kingdom teetering on the brink of collapse. Before 1789, France was running on an old operating system called the Ancien Régime, or the Old Regime. And in this world, there weren't citizens, there were only subjects. Society was locked into three rigid classes, known as the estates. At the very top, you had the first estate, the clergy. They were less than 1% of the population, but held enormous power. They advised the king, controlled huge amounts of land and wealth, and paid basically zero taxes. Right below them was the second estate, the nobility. These were the born and bred aristocrats who got all the perks, held the highest jobs, and also, conveniently, paid no taxes. And then there was everyone else, the third estate. We're talking over 95% of the French population. This included everyone from peasants and city workers to educated middle-class lawyers and merchants, the so-called bourgeoisie. Even though they created almost all of the nation's wealth, they were stuck with the entire tax bill. They had no political power, no real voice, and very few rights. A farmer could be ruined by one bad harvest, while a baker in Paris watched the price of bread, the food of the people, skyrocket because of some distant king's screw-up. This deeply unfair system was propped up by King Louis XVI, a monarch who believed he ruled by the will of God himself. But by the late 1780s, the kingdom was broke. Decades of lavish spending, costly wars, including, ironically, helping fund the American Revolution, and a joke of a tax system had completely drained the treasury. To fix the mess, the king needed cash, and that meant he had to do something that hadn't been done since 1614. Call a meeting of the Estates General, an assembly with representatives from all three estates. It was a Hail Mary, and it turned out to be a fatal mistake. He had just lit the fuse on a social powder keg, and no one was ready for the explosion. In May 1789, representatives from all three estates arrived at the stunning Palace of Versailles. The folks from the third estate came hoping for real reform, like fairer taxes, and a little more say in how things were run. But they quickly figured out the game was rigged. Traditionally, each estate voted as one block, which meant the clergy and nobility could always team up to shut the third estate down, 2-1. So, the third estate, fed up and pushed aside, did something truly revolutionary. On June 20, 1789, they declared themselves the National Assembly, the real voice of the French people. After finding themselves locked out of their usual meeting room, they famously gathered on an indoor tennis court and took a solemn oath, the tennis court oath. They swore they wouldn't leave until they had written a new constitution for France. This wasn't just a protest, it was a direct challenge to the king's absolute power. The people were claiming power for themselves. News of this defiance shot through Paris, fueling an already tense city. On July 14th, terrified the king was about to send in the army, a mob of Parisians did the unthinkable. They stormed the Bastille. This medieval fortress was a terrifying symbol of royal power, a prison where you could be thrown without a trial. The crowd completely overwhelmed the guards, grabbed all the weapons they could, and tore the building down brick by brick. The fall of the Bastille wasn't just a prison break, it was a deafening message that the people could tear down the very symbols of their oppression. The revolutionary spirit caught fire. In the countryside, peasants rose up against their lords in a panic known as the Great Fear, burning castles and destroying records of their deaths. Back in the National Assembly, on August 4th, 1789, a group of nobles, basically fearing for their lives, stood up and renounced their feudal privileges. Just like that, the centuries-old feudal system was gone. A few weeks later, the Assembly produced one of the most important documents ever written, the Declaration of the Rights of the Man and the Citizen. Inspired by the Enlightenment and the American Declaration of Independence, it made the radical claim that men are born and remain free and equal in rights. It called for liberty, property, security, and the right to resist oppression. It established equality before the law, freedom of speech, and the idea that the nation, not the king, was the true source of power. This wasn't just reform, this was a blueprint for a new world. The revolution had begun, but its bloodiest, most radical chapter was still to come. The Declaration was a beautiful promise, but the reality was pure chaos. King Louis XVI dragged his feet, refusing to accept the new reality. So in October 1789, thousands of Parisian women, enraged by the insane price of bread, marched all the way to Versailles. They physically forced the royal family to pack up and move to Paris, where they could be kept under the people's watch. For a couple of years, France tried to be a constitutional monarchy, but the trust between the king and the revolution was shattered. The final nail in the coffin came in June 1791, when the royal family tried to flee the country in disguise. They were caught, and the escape was seen for what it was: treason. Things got even more extreme. Worried that this revolution flu would spread, other European powers like Austria and Prussia declared war on France to restore the king to his throne. This foreign threat only made the revolutionaries more radical. In August 1792, they abolished the monarchy entirely and declared France a republic. In a radical move for the time, they gave nearly all men the right to vote, though this policy wouldn't stick around consistently. They even changed the calendar and street names, trying to erase every trace of the old world. Then came the trial of citizen Louis Capet, the man who used to be King Louis XVI. He was found guilty of treason and on January 21st, 1793, was executed by the guillotine in the middle of Paris. His wife, Marie Antoinette, met the same fate 9 months later. These executions sent a shockwave across the world. There was no turning back now. This kicked off the Reign of Terror. A radical faction called the Jacobins, led by the intense Maximilien Robespierre, took control. They formed the Committee of Public Safety to protect the revolution from its enemies. But what started as a defense measure spiraled into a paranoid bloodbath. A terrifying new culture of denunciation took hold. Your neighbor could accuse you, and you could be arrested, put through a sham trial, and sent to the guillotine. Over the next year, tens of thousands were executed, not just nobles, but fellow revolutionaries who weren't considered radical enough. It was a horrifying paradox. A movement for the rights of man was now systematically taking them away, all in the name of liberty. The Reign of Terror couldn't last. A machine that constantly needs new enemies eventually turns on its creators. In July 1794, Robespierre himself was arrested and guillotined, killed by the very system of terror he helped build. His death ended the most radical phase of the revolution. But France was a wreck. The new government, called the Directory, was corrupt, weak, and couldn't get anything done. The country was still at war, and the political divisions were deeper than ever. And into this giant power vacuum stepped a young, brilliant, and incredibly ambitious general, Napoleon Bonaparte. In 1799, Napoleon seized power in a coup, effectively ending the French Revolution and setting up a military dictatorship. In so many ways, he was the opposite of what the revolution stood for. He crowned himself emperor, took away many freedoms, and dragged Europe into a series of brutal wars. And yet, Napoleon also protected and even spread some of the revolution's key ideas. He created the Napoleonic Code, a single set of laws for all of France that locked in principles like legal equality and property rights. This code was so influential, it became the model for legal systems in dozens of other countries. As his armies marched across Europe, they tore down the old feudal systems and spread the revolutionary ideas of citizenship and equality, even if they delivered them at the point of the sword. He built a society where your talent, not your family name, could get you ahead. That was a core revolutionary ideal. The French Revolution is a story of wild contradictions. It teaches us that cries for liberty can sometimes lead to tyranny. and a fight for equality can spiral into a bloodbath. But it also shows that even out of absolute chaos, profound and permanent change can be born. What do you think? Can the good that comes from a revolution ever truly justify its violence? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to keep exploring the messy, complicated moments that shaped our world, make sure you're subscribed and hit that notification bell. So, how did a bloody revolution forge your rights? It did it by smashing the old world to pieces. The French Revolution tore down a society built on hereditary privilege and introduced the radical idea that power belongs to the people. It gave us the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen, a document whose principles of liberty and equality have echoed in every major human rights charter since, including the UN's Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948. The revolution created the very concept of the citizen, an equal member of a nation with both rights and duties, not just a subject bowing to a king. It separated church and state, laid the groundwork for public education, and proved that ordinary people could rise up to demand a better world. And while its path was soaked in blood and its immediate result was a dictatorship, the ideas it unleashed, liberty, equality, fraternity, they were too powerful to be contained. They became the building blocks for modern democracy, inspiring countless movements for freedom around the globe. The rights you have today weren't just handed down, they were fought for in a chaotic, violent, and world-changing struggle that kicked off on the streets of Paris over 200 years ago.